Well, greetings from a somewhat surprisingly damp and cloudy Malaga. I thought Spain was supposed to be where you went to get winter sun, but apparently not today. Welcome to Complete Car, and welcome to this, which is the new Audi Q5. Now, I know what you're thinking. That looks an awful lot like an Audi Q6 e-tron, and you're not wrong. A lot of the styling here at the front does seem to be, if not quite carried over, then certainly very, very similar. You get these piercing LED headlights set up high just under the leading edge of the bonnet, and these are the optional matrix LED ones, so you can change these light patterns and signatures within the bulbs. It's all quite high tech. You've got the usual Audi massive single frame grille, and this being a sporty S-line version, of course, all this is blacked out. There's no chrome on the exterior on this one. You get these big deep air intakes and this chunky bumper. It is a very imposing looking car for what is actually a relatively compact, or at least medium sized luxury SUV. Now, it's worth mentioning the color here. This is called Sakhir Gold. Sakhir, of course, is the Formula One racetrack at Bahrain, and Audi is entering Formula One as a works team next year, so clearly it's getting its color options named and lined up for that. We've seen this color before already. We drove a massive Q7 last year in this color, and frankly, I think it looks great. I know a lot of people hate it, but it's really distinctive. It's really different. It's really quite cool. It's also really about $2.5 grand as an option. So, you know, you get what you pay for, I guess. But this is a very, very handsome car. I mean, the Q5 kind of always has been, but there's no mistaking that this is a successor to that very, very successful model line. Since the Q5 was originally launched, it's sold more than 2 million units around the world. This is a very big deal for Audi. It's one of its big, big sellers. Now, it does come in two versions. This is the SUV version, basically. So you can see down the back here, it's got a long roof and a chunky rear end. There is a sportback version, which is much more sharply angled here, much more coupe-ish, if a big car like this can be a coupe. Personally, I think this is the better looking version. And anyway, we won't get the sportback in Ireland for another few months yet. The arrival of this, the SUV version, is imminent, with prices starting from just over €71,000 for the 2-litre TFSI petrol with front-wheel drive. Now, this is a 2-litre TDI diesel with 4-wheel drive and 204 horsepower. There is a sportier SQ5 with 369 horsepower and 4-wheel drive, and later this year there will be a pair of plug-in hybrids with around about a 90 to 100 kilometre electric-only range and power of up to that same 369 horsepower, matching the SQ5 with a planet-hugging hybrid. That's not bad going at all, is it? But before we go out and test drive this new Q5, we need to take a look at the interior. So let's go and do just that. Now again, you need to bear in mind that this is a highly specified S-line model. So this is not the basic €71,000 car. This with diesel power, more like about €83,000 at home. So you do get basically the cabin architecture and screens and bits and bobs from the new A5 saloon, but just taller. So it's basically the A5 with lifts in its shoes. Actually, that's true of the platform too, because this is all riding on the premium platform combustion, or PPC platform, which it's kind of a new platform, but I mean, strictly speaking, mechanically and physically, it's actually the old MLB Evo platform, which stretches right the way back to many older Audi models. But although the mechanical and physical bits are similar, all of the software and operating stuff have been vastly updated and upgraded. And you can see that here. You've got a very clever driver's digital display with which you can do all sorts of things in terms of personalization and setting it up for the information you want to get. There's an augmented reality head-up display projected onto the windscreen. That's actually a very, very good one. And there's this massive infotainment screen here in the center. Now, this is good, and it's pretty slick to use. I mean, if we go and look at the sat-nav, you can see it's quite responsive. But, you know, again, no physical buttons for the air conditioning controls, and there's a lot of menus. I mean, look, it's got Amazon Alexa, for God's sake. There's so much stuff to go through. And earlier on, while driving, I noticed that just to turn off the lane keeping assist, which is something you do need to do on a twisty road, it involves going in through too many menus. It is fiddly. There are some physical buttons. There is a physical radio, stereo volume control down here. Well, that is nice. and a physical drive select button that allows you to pick between the various different driving modes. And I've just turned it on by doing that, which is not necessarily helpful, but anyway. Now, optionally, there is this screen on the passenger side too, through which the passenger can do things like control the sat-nav and the music choices and all that kind of thing. It's a bit superfluous, I think. I mean, there's nothing you do on that you can't do on this screen, and while it's maybe a bit handy for the passenger, I do feel that most people who are sitting here are just going to be on their tablet or on their phone anyway, so maybe not a huge amount of point in it. One of the nice things about S-Line trim is you get these lovely quilted bucket seats in the front. These are very, very comfortable. These are some of the best seats you'll sit on. And storage space is good too. You've got cup holders here, you've got a wireless phone charging pad here, quite small door bins for such a big car, but there is a nice large storage space here under the armrest, and that is very useful. The steering wheel, this one adjusts electrically, which is quite handy. It's slightly squared off, which still seems weird to me. I would prefer a completely round wheel, but it is nice to hold, and you do get that new flat Audi logo, which looks quite classy. Overall quality does seem to be exceptionally good. I mean, again, this is the S-Line, so you get this kind of sporty checker plate trim here. But I mean, everything looks and feels really, really nice. It does live up to that 70-odd thousand euro price tag. But it's also supposed to be a practical family car. So what's it like in the back? Well, as you can see, space in the back of the Q5 is fine, but it's maybe not exceptional. Now, the seat is set quite high, and so you do feel nicely supported. The seat back kind of grips the backs of your legs here. That is nice. Plenty of room for your feet under the front seat. That's good. There's a really big chunky center console, though, so anyone who's stuck here in this middle seat is not going to be comfortable. Legroom is pretty good because, as you can see, the backs of the front seats are slightly scalloped out, so that does help a bit. But that front seat, that's my driving position, and it does feel quite close. It doesn't help, I suppose, that these are the bulky S-Line sports seats. Headroom is very, very good, though, helped by the fact that this particular car does not have the optional panoramic sunroof. And the side windows are nice and big, so you do get a good view out, but they are quite high set, so children, small children back here, might find that the cabin's a little bit dark. It is very comfortable, though. You do get the sense that these seats are just as supportive and good as those in the front, and that is nice. You do get 2 USB sockets. These are really powerful ones. These are up to 100 watts of power, which will charge your phone pretty darn quickly. And there are also temperature controls down here, and this one has the optional heated rear seats as well. You do get handy storage nets, and there are actually quite good door bins here in the back. You'll certainly be able to fit a decent sized bottle of water in one of those. The boot is actually pretty good, 520 litres, which isn't the biggest in its class by any stretch, but it is well shaped, it's got a low loading lip, and crucially, Audi has now found space underneath the floor to be able to stash the retracting luggage cover when you don't need it. And when you fold down these back seats, you've got more than 1,400 litres of space to play with. So it is at least a reasonably practical car. Not the biggest in the back, but it'll do fine. I mean, I'm just over 6 foot and I can fit comfortably back here. But now that we've checked out the practicality, I think it's time to go for a proper test drive. Well, I think one of the first things I have to point out is that once I got back into the Q5 to come and drive it, I remembered, actually I didn't remember, somebody helpfully pointed out, because my 50-year-old brain does not remember stuff anymore, that you can turn off the lane keeping system with the simple press and hold of a button here on the column stalk. So thankfully it is now off. And I say thankfully because the lane keeping can get quite insistent, particularly on twisty roads like this. It puts in little sort of short, sharp movements of the steering like that. You'll definitely want to turn it off unless you're cruising along the motorway or at least a big wide main road. And cruising along the motorway and a big wide main road is pretty much what this car is going to excel at. Now, this one does have the optional $3,500, I think it's 3,300 actually, air suspension fitted to it. And I have to say, that is an option very well worth having. It does get caught out by short, sharp, sort of urban intrusions. It'll clatter into something like that. But once you're up here on the open road, and to be fair, the roads around Malaga are very good and very well surfaced, but it does have exceptional smoothness and refinement, and actually really, really good body control too. There are some quite tricky, tight off-camber corners around here, And you can point the big chunky nose of this big chunky Q5 into them with no small amount of confidence, thanks to the way that air suspension keeps the body nice and steady, nice and level, and allows you to exploit what is actually surprisingly good agility. Now, I'm driving it in balanced mode at the moment, so the steering is quite light, but there is still a reasonable modicum of feedback. When you put it into dynamic mode, the weight goes up, the feedback does seem to improve a little bit, and it becomes a really surprisingly enthusiastic car to drive. I mean, it's not a hot hatch, and it's no TT, but it is actually very pleasant, and it feels just a smidge more agile than the old Q5. It does still do that typical Audi thing of it's quite sort of weighty, and it feels like it's got big heavy wheels on it, and it's a little bit syrupy compared to the more sort of precise feeling you get from the BMW X3, for example, which is a direct rival to this car. But it's good. It's satisfying. It's the kind of car I think you wouldn't get tired of driving it too quickly, and that is a nice thing indeed. Now, this 2-litre diesel, I mean, it feels really old school to be driving a 2-litre diesel these days, but it is a very good engine. It's a little bit on the noisy side. I think it's a bit noisier in here than it is in the A5 Saloon that we drove last year, actually. But 204 horsepower, there's plenty of poke, there's good torque, and that's helped by the fact that this is a mild hybrid. So there's an 18 kilowatt electric motor sandwiched into the gearbox, and there's a little lithium-ion battery that powers that. So it is a mild hybrid. It's not a Toyota-style hybrid. You won't be doing lots and lots of miles on electric power. But it is quite nice that you can do a lot of your low-speed maneuvering, a lot of your parking stuff, for instance, just running on the electric motor. That is quite nice, quite handy, and your neighbours will thank you for it if you have a lot of early starts. Getting up at 5 in the morning and firing up a big old diesel isn't the most popular thing to do these days, is it? Fuel economy is very, very good. I mean, not quite a full tank, and I'm showing a range of more than 830 kilometers until I need to refuel. And actually, diesel's 128 down the road here. I mean, come on guys, we all need to move to Malaga, let's face it. Refinement is fine. I mean, with those big alloys on it, 19's a standard, and the optional range goes up to 21s. There's an absolute massive plethora of different alloy wheel designs that you can have for this car. You do pick up a bit of road roar even at these relatively low speeds. It's not as bad as you think on the motorway, actually, but definitely that's something that I think Audi could look at and maybe try and bring that down a little bit. I think overall, there's not a massive step from the old Q5 to this Q5. Yes, you get the new swishy interior, and yes, it does feel a little bit sharper to drive, but it's not, it's evolution rather than revolution. And you can see where Audi is positioning this car next to the all-electric Q6 e-tron, which does ride on a completely different platform, even though the two cars look broadly similar on the outside. The Q6 e-tron shares a chassis with the Porsche Macan electric. And obviously Audi is now upending its plan to have odd-numbered cars as petrols and diesels and hybrids, and even-numbered cars as pure electric. That's gone out the window now. So presumably at some point the Q5 and Q6 ranges will come back together again. Probably not in this generation, maybe in the next generation. But overall, it feels like a very satisfying car. I do love this Sakir gold color. It's really nice. I mean, I know everybody's not going to love it, but I think it's kind of cool. And it just feels like a pleasant thing to drive. You're not going to get bored of it. It's going to do those long journeys really effortlessly with this 2-litre diesel engine. It's not going to cost a fortune to run. It is expensive to buy, because while that €71,000 price tag is, it's certainly competitive with the likes of the BMW X3, and it's a bit cheaper than a Mercedes GLC. Once you start adding options, and almost everything is an option. I mean, even adaptive cruise control, which you get as standard on a Toyota Corolla, that's an option, and not a cheap one either. Once you start ladling all that stuff on, you are into some seriously expensive territory, and it will be frighteningly easy to spec an Audi Q5 up beyond €100,000. In fact, the SQ5, the sporty one, which we're going to go and drive now in a minute, that's already over €100,000. That's €111,000 without any options. So yeah, it's, like everything else, it ain't cheap anymore. But it is a good car. It looks smart. It's nice to drive. It's got a really lovely interior. It's tolerably practical. So yeah, if you're in the market for a medium-sized premium brand SUV, you definitely want to have this on your shopping list, and you definitely want to go and take a test drive. One thing that's worth mentioning is the brakes, because there is a clever new braking system on this car, which is that it does most of its braking from the regeneration for the mild hybrid system. In fact, Audi says you really only activate the physical discs and pads when you really stand quite firmly on the brake pedal. Now, often that would end with us saying, it feels a bit mushy and weird and not very consistent, but actually, and bearing in mind we're on some very tight and twisty mountain roads up here with really tight corners, and this is a big heavy car, actually it feels fine. In fact, I'd say it feels very good. Pedal feel is firm, the brakes feel responsive, you never feel like you're stepping through a detente from the regenerative braking into the friction braking. It's actually a very, very natural feel. So bravo Audi, you've made regenerative and friction braking work together really well, which, to be fair, not everybody else has done. I think that's a big tick in the box for this car. Well, we're now out in the SQ5. This is still the SUV body shape, incidentally, not the Sportback. But the two cars get the same engine. It's a turbocharged 3-litre V6 TFSI engine with the same mild hybrid support that the diesel we were driving before gets. But this, instead of 204 horsepower, has 369 and 550 newton meters of torque, and it'll get to 100 kilometers an hour from rest in 5.5 seconds, which is pretty good going for something this big and chunky. Obviously air suspension once again, but with a sportier tune to it. And you do have, as you have in the standard car, the Audi Drive Select system, which allows you to flick between comfort and dynamic and balanced and so on. There's even an off-road function, but I mean, anyone who's going to take one of these off-road is, well, do such people even exist, I wonder? At least you do have the security of Quattro four-wheel drive, though, for when the weather gets nasty and the road becomes more slippery. That is thankfully something we're not dealing with now, as the sun has finally come out here in Malaga, and the road is drying up quite nicely. And that gives the SQ5 the opportunity to show off its chassis balance and deportment, and it is really, really good. I mean, was it ever going to be anything other? Probably not, but certainly there is something very impressive about the way Audi's engineers can get a big, heavy SUV like this to handle with such point shoe delicacy. Now, it does that Audi thing of, again, it all feels very weighty and very kind of beefy. You know, you're never unaware of the vehicle's weight. You're never unaware of the fact that the wheels are big and hefty, stuck out at the corners of the car. So it doesn't so much dance around the laws of physics as it just plows straight through them. But it does so in a very impressive way. And the way that this SQ5 can be coaxed into the apex of a corner at very high speed. I mean, there's really good steering feel, really good weight, really good balance to all the controls. And when you're going through these tight and twisty mountain roads high up above Malaga, as we are today, you can really rely on that front end grip and traction. You can turn in, brake hard. Again, these mixed brakes, the brakes that use both regenerative and friction braking, they're very, very good and very, very well balanced. And they just give you so much confidence to do what you want to do and what you need to do. And so you can have enormously good fun driving this car. The engine also sounds really good. If anything, it could do with being a bit louder at times, particularly when you're in dynamic mode. Unfortunately, I can't really demonstrate that for you at the moment because we're stuck behind quite a slow moving Suzuki, so I can't really get higher than about 2,000 RPM at the minute. But it is a really cracking power plant, this. It's very responsive, very smooth, a nice snarl and a little bit of overrun pop through the exhausts when you back off, which is, yes, very childish, I know, but I still like it. And let's face it, who doesn't? Not a cheap car, €111,000, and that's before you started adding options, and inevitably those options are going to bump up the price by quite a lot. But this is a really, really impressive bit of high performance SUV kit. Not the ultimate in high performance. If you want that, actually go for one of Audi's sportier electric models. I mean, those are the ones that give you the real neck snapping acceleration these days. But as a balanced, all-round, really impressive performer, yeah, this is pushing a lot of very, very pleasant buttons.